Ladies and gentlemen, everyone around and in between, this is DebateSensei NFA LD edition, where we talk about things relevant to competitive NFA LD debate. We have our experts from Western Kentucky University, Chad Meadows, the director of debate, and we also have from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, Dr. Justin Kirk. Thank you very much. Excellent. So we're talking about debating over winter break. Um, Debating over winter break. And so that was always, oh man, I always had such high hopes. I told myself I was going to be so disciplined over winter break. Um, and I was really bad about that. So it'll be good to go over some suggestions on what to do. Um, Anybody, what do you think is the major obstacle to debating over winter break?
So I can start real quick because I think the schedule provides the primary barrier to
Mm,
students staying engaged over the winter break. Up until like last year or the year before, the last tournament of the semester was usually at Illinois State. Now it's the Big Ten Online. So you've got one first weekend of December, but typically you'd be done second week in November. And the next major tournament that anybody goes to is at the end of January. And so you've got almost 3 months without debates.
mm.
Now you've got about 1.5 to 2 months. But I think structurally, the schedule itself doesn't really lend to NFALD over the break as much as other formats do. And so I think that kind of produces the kind of need to have a strategy for that 2 or 3 month gap when your students will be just getting rusty and not practicing, not thinking about debates, stuff like that.
So this is a problem that's a little bit more unique to NFA than other formats.
Yeah, a lot of other formats have a tournament over winter break. But
Mm,
as of yet, that has not emerged in NFALD. So I think there's, something that needs to fill that gap for your team to keep the students engaged and to, keep their minds on debate. Because it's a strange quirk of the schedule. Because it's like a lot of students are going to go to the Redbird and then not debate again until the Gorlock, the end of January. But then it just so happens the Gorlock is the most competitive tournament of the season. So it's
okay.
like months with no debate, bam,
Yeah.
the more consequential debates that you're going to have during the entire season. So I agree. Having some kind of a strategy over winter break to stay engaged, to stay fresh is really important.
Yeah, the I was talking with on the CETA edition, and California typically has them and makes a lot of sense during the winter. Southern California specifically, but it makes a lot of sense that over winter you find some place that maybe you can escape some weather you might be experiencing. Man, we got to have something out here in California for NFA. That'd be great.
I've been pushing the UNLV squad to host over the winter break because Vegas
Mm.
is very, very nice in December and
Oh,
January.
okay, okay. And
I think
UNLV.
they're hosting first weekend of March this year.
Okay.
But I think one of the things, my experience, I coached in CETA NDT for a while. The Texas and Kansas swings were always a staple of the winter break, right? You take a
Mm,
couple weeks off for Christmas, and then you come back right after Christmas to prep a week for tournaments that begin the day after New Year's. And one of the things we've been doing as a squad, especially since the topic is the same, and I know Chad has been doing this a lot this year with his squad, is we're going to go to the Kansas swings over the winter break because it's
mm.
just two tournaments that are real close to us. And it's a nice way to keep the engine running. So that would be like maybe tip number one is if there are other formats that you have experience in or like to try out, that's a
Mm,
great way to keep the debate brain working, even if you're
mm.
not still on the same topic. And we did that a couple of years ago, even when the topics were different, just to get some more debates in.
Yeah, when I was doing Parley, that was one of the few tournaments I went to was over winter break. I believe it was at Fullerton, because it was in my backyard. And so one of the only times I ever did a CETA tournament was over winter break. So it's strange. I didn't remember that until you started talking about, yeah, well, I tried different formats. Oh, huh, pretty cool. Um, Last time we were talking about assignments that you do for the week of the tournament. Are there any particular assignments that pop to mind that are really appropriate for over winter break?
Yeah. So historically, on our team, we have people write a new AF over winter break. Like the major assignment, because I mean, it's really challenging to write an AF, especially like in a a season-long tournament setting. And a lot of people, when they write a new AF, they don't think a ton about the spillover effect that occurs from the new AF. The blocks you've written to dissets, counterplans, and critiques are premised on the AF that you had before.
Right.
Writing a new AF can be like a really big undertaking that can kind of like require a lot of free time. So one of the big things I would suggest is if you're not in a position to attend a tournament over winter break and you've got a big break, think about it as the time where like you can write an AF. And it doesn't even have to be an AF that you read at the next tournament, right? Like think about NFA. You can start writing the AF that you want to break in the most important moments of the season at NFA over winter break and have those things locked and ready to go.
Yeah, I would concur. And I would say some of the best AFs come out of those like extended research periods where you're like really digging into the literature. Whereas like if you're in the middle of a semester and you're in the middle of competition, sometimes the AFs you put together in those weeks in between aren't the best. But like if you have 2 months to work on an AF and you're like, okay, well, here are the best arguments against this affirmative. How am I going to set this AF up to be responsive to those arguments and put myself in the best position to win this debate? You have lots of time to work through all the different nuances and complexities. And I think the block writing part that Chad mentioned too is invaluable, because even if you're not going to read the AF, the process of like producing an AF is a valuable thought process for debaters.
Okay, so would you say that other teams are kind of in the same boat, that they're also writing a bunch of new AFs over winter break? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common thing that like teams with an experienced coach are going to do. I think the degree to which the coach can like enforce that ask varies from team to team. But I think a lot of people are going to be thinking about writing a new AF over break.
Mm-hmm. All right. And that's the hard part about preparing for that tournament, the Gorlock, is you kind of know the best teams are all coming with new stuff and nobody's debated in months. And so you're kind of like going into the first tournament of the season all over again, because anybody could read anything.
Does that mean that, you were just talking about coming back into the Gorlock. I mean, like, so that's just the time when people just start rolling them out?
Mm-hmm. Oh, man. And you'll probably have, I mean, this topic's a little different because there's not going to be a ton of new AFs, but I think there'll be some like nuanced and different AFs. But like typically to Gorlock, you'll hear 5 to 10 new AFs that weekend.
Oh, wow.
And you just have to kind of be on your game to be ready. Like that's part of the game of prepping for that tournament, is like the next stuff is going to come on day 2, right? We're going to have to roll with our fall strats on day 1, because we're not going to have the time to research all the new AFs all on day 1. We're going to have to like reset after the first day and kind of think about, well, here's what Western Kentucky's reading. Here's what North Texas is reading. How do we adjust what we have to better win those debates?
Do people organize any sort of other activities, not like a tournament necessarily, but like workshops or we used to call them scrimmages sometimes? Is that something that would be appropriate over winter?
Yeah, so I think winter break is a time where we will try to like set up some like meetings with like alumni, or just kind of like maybe try to get some folks involved. I mean, if you think about it, like Christmas is the time when like a lot of folks are taking off work. Maybe they have a little extra time on their hands. So like if you wanted to like have an alumni look at an AF or watch a debate, like that might be a time that you do that. So personally, I'm a big fan of like, you need breaks from debate. So we don't have like any like mandatory, like gotta be here for like this thing over winter break. We do like some research assignments, some sort of like stuff that we're asking, folks to do. But for the most part, I do think that like a part of that break needs to be, a break. It is just such a challenging activity. I don't know that there's any competitive activity with as long of a competitive season as debate. And so, I mean, I think it is important to, structure and get some stuff done, but I think it's also important just to rest and come back with some fresh perspective.
Okay, when do you think it's time to get back into work on debate?
For us, it was easier before they moved the start of our school to after the Gorlock for the January.
Oh,
We used to start the second week of January, and so everybody was back at school, and you're like, okay, we're back at it. We've got 2 weeks for the first tournament, and we're gonna get to work. Now that we start after the Gorlock, like the Gorlock happens before we're even back in classes.
okay.
We tend to do like a couple of work days or maybe a work weekend before the Gorlock. When's everybody coming back to town? Let's do the Saturday and Sunday before school starts and before we travel to kind of get everything kind of figured out and organized. But we are very much like Chad's program in that we want students to have a break. And then if they want to invest some time over the break into getting better at something or other, the break's also a really good time to do like a skills focused program for a particular debater. You've been having trouble winning debates on topicality. I think over the winter break, you should do 10 TU debates and practice this so that when you go to the Gorlock in the spring, you know, you've got a new tool in your toolbox. So I think that's another thing that you can do is if a particular student wants to work on something that is a longer term kind of skills based project, now's a great time to start that. Because you have a couple of months to kind of work through some issues and some processes that may be more beneficial in the long term.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so I think winter break kind of demands a different kind of energy to improve. A lot of students get into very much like a boom bust cycle with like their debate preparation. You know, like tournaments coming up, ramp up the effort. Tournaments over, breathe, do nothing. Tournaments come, it's like that starts up. There's nothing to ramp up to, so having kind of like a schedule that encourages more like consistent small spurts of work, I think over winter break is really helpful. And I think that it's important in students' minds to kind of dispel the idea that like debate work has to be an all-day thing, right?
Right.
Like, a lot of times when a student, thinks about like improving a skill or writing an NF or updating files, it can kind of be overwhelming because it's like, oh my gosh, like I want to see my fan. It's like, well, yeah, like under no circumstances should debate trade off with all the good things you can do over winter break. But like, think about debate for like an hour a day, maybe, or 30 minutes a day, or an hour every other day, right? Like, if you really committed to doing that, like you could, as Justin mentioned, like dramatically get better at one skill. I mean, let's say that you're getting blown out in debates against folks that are fast. Between November and January, you could come back as an incredibly clear, quick debater, right? Like if that's like what you really wanted to do. So I think defining what you want to improve and then kind of doing the work to figure out what are the inputs that are required for me to accomplish that goal is kind of like a thing that you can do. And so, maybe like a good thing that folks could do is just like have a meeting pre-winter break with your coach, with your team, with anybody who'll listen to you and kind of say like, what's the game plan for winter break and what are we going to do to kind of accomplish that game plan?
In contrast to skills building, it seems like some simple choices could help the knowledge building part of it too, right? Like if you are finding yourself traveling, all right, the book that you choose to take with you could be pretty key, right?
I was just about to mention winter break is a great time to read that book you haven't had time to read during the semester that is like essential to the topic that everyone has read already that you just like missed in August and has been sitting on your shelf for 3 months because you haven't had the time to like actually read a whole book. I tend to like find myself reading 5 or 6 books over the break just because that's the kind of debate thinking that can happen in a slower space. Books tend to have a little bit more complicated arguments in journal articles or newspaper articles. Sometimes you want to read it a couple of times to like figure out where this might fit in your arguments. And so winter break's a really good time for that kind of like slow research process where you're thinking about kind of like bigger pictures and reading those books in context of like arguments that have been made in the fall can give you a new perspective on how to do those things. I always tell my students, find one book that you think will make your argument better. And even if you don't read the whole book, find some evidence or find some arguments in that book that will make your argument better that you can incorporate into your blocks, because it may not have a card in it, but reading the Entandi book over the break can give you 15 anecdotes for deployment in a rebuttal that are good arguments that don't need a card necessarily. You can refer to history, you can refer to like empirical evidence that is factual, that you can get out of books that normally you wouldn't get during the course of a debate season.
Yeah, 1,000,000% agree with that. And a good way of thinking about it is like the season demands one kind of thinking that can short circuit understanding. So if someone broke, like, well, let's say that like, you got caught unawares and you didn't think about the assurance dissad. Then, oh my gosh, everyone has an assurance allies dissad. Maybe you cut answers to it and like you quickly, it's as quickly as you could found a bunch of answers and like those were the blocks that you use in your set, right? Okay, but like you never got to read any background information on South Korean politics. You never got to read about why Japan's military is defensive. You don't, have a good knowledge of the Washington Declaration, right? Like, and so like some of the like slow things that the competitive demands of the season maybe have caused you to miss, you could fill in over the winter break because the demand for new answers, new case negs, new, it's not there right now. And you can kind of go back and fill in and figure things out. Because I mean, honestly, if you know what you're talking about, like actually know what you're talking about, you're going to be really competitive, in my opinion, in most debates.
Yes.
Right. And yeah, so like sitting down without the obligation to cut, like might just like that in and of itself might be a form of relaxation, but at the same time still knowledge building.
Well, and I think it's especially important for young students who come from, I mean, I get a couple of like Nat Circuit folks from high school, and they process information and arguments in Nat Circuit high school debate very differently than we want to process on the team here. It's very much a, as fast as you can produce evidence as possible. And I typically use winter break as like the first chance to get back to those students and say, okay, now we're going to really work on how you think about research, how you think about what you're going to look for.
Right.
Not relying on other people's files, but like building a knowledge base of your own, and starting to think about like how these arguments interact with one another. And I think Chad's 100% right, is the students who have the best like general knowledge base about the topic tend to do better as the season goes on, because it's those small differences between the deterrence dissad last week and the deterrence dissad with this week that student's going to have a grasp of, like why they're different, rather than just being like, it's another deterrence dissad, read my blocks. Right. And I think that nuance is the difference between, your 4-2 debater and your 5-1 gonna make it to semis or finals at nationals debater. Because that person can win those small little debates inside the debate with that knowledge base.
Is there a different approach? Is there a different approach that certain debaters need to take if they're going for some sort of elite level stuff? Like what is, I don't know, there's like the Copeland Award in CETA. Is there a analog in NFA that it might require somebody to put in more work over the winter break?
So we have the All-American Awards at the Grand Prix.
Oh, right. Okay.
I would not say that they rise to the history and prestige yet of the Copeland Award.
Oh, right. Okay.
As they're just 1 year. But, this year, at least I've heard people on my team talking about it a few times. And so, yeah, like if you want to be kind of like thought of in that echelon, I think doing well at Webster would be a good kind of like marker for, getting that kind of recognition. I think it depends on your approach. So, a lot of people over, first semester, they're probably not going to, at least for us, we're not going to change up very much first semester.
Yeah.
We're not going to do a lot of new stuff. We're going to like push all that to second semester. And so, yeah, I think developing, the set of arguments that are going to be in your wheelhouse that you plan to sort of like be utilizing in those more precious moments, those precious debates that you really want to win, I think is important, and it depends on your team and what's important to you. I know for us, like we're like, we think about, when would we break a new app? Like to us, you don't have to break anything new at the round robin, but we want to win that. So we prep really hard for that. We want to do really well at Webster. So it's like, let's say that we're hitting Nebraska's best debater in quarters. We may think about breaking a new app in that situation because we know Nebraska is going to be really prepared for that debate. We maybe we want a little bit of an edge in that moment. And so to us, winning Webster, winning the Gorlock is really important. And so we may do that in that moment. We want to do well at the Grand Prix. So I think defining that, I think for most things, because it's a newer circuit, it's a little less defined than the C to NDT circuit, but the principle is the same. Yeah.
Right.
There are things that you want to accomplish during the season, and winter break is a great time to start thinking about how you go about doing it.
Yeah. And I think, I get a lot of feedback from my debaters that are like, ooh, I lost this debate to this person in the fall, and I'm going to spend all winter prepping this debate. And I'm like, you may never get that debate this year. That may be the only time you have that debate all year. Focusing on one person you want to beat in the spring semester or two people you want to beat is way less useful than thinking about how can I maximize the things I'm already really good at in the fall, the things that worked for my success in the fall, and B, where did I lose debates that I could have done a little bit of work and changed in the margins. I think winter break's a great time to go back through all the rounds you had in the fall and say which ones were close. And what small changes can I make to win these rounds instead of lose them the next time? And which rounds were blowouts that I need a little bit more investment and time? Like Chad was saying, if I just need to get faster, right? Knowing that and having an inventory of here's where I can get better. I also think that given kind of our competition between the two squads in the last few years,
right,
one of the big things that we would do over the break is sit down and rewrite all of our arguments against our biggest competitors. Not hey, we got to come up with a new strategy for Western Kentucky, but let's not give them anything that they've seen or heard in the same kind of character or flavor that they heard. Maybe the same evidence, but definitely going to have a different kind of feel to the arguments, a different shading to the arguments almost. And that provides us with a little bit of an edge in the event that we have a head-to-head against Western Kentucky at the Gorlock, right? Things are a little bit different. So they're going to have to think on their feet and we'll have to think on our feet. And maybe doesn't need a new app. Maybe it just needs a new articulation of the way the app functions vis-a-vis the disad. And that you've been watching some NDT debates, and oh my goodness, the way that Kentucky deployed this in this round was really cool. I'm going to do it that way instead of this way. Now's a great time to go back and rewrite those blocks so that you can emulate the kind of arguments that work a little bit better.
You were talking a second ago about students, they get motivated and they get laser focused on it. Do you think that there is there's pressure to sort of sacrifice time off or time with family or this break time in order to put more energy into prepping for debate?
I mean, there can be, but I think that's coach dependent.
Okay.
I think that is very program dependent.
You think the coaches have more influence than the competitors do?
I tend to think that the culture of the team has a lot of impact on that, right? One of our big things is we like being around each other, and so if we can slip debate into a let's all hang out together and maybe talk about arguments while we're hanging out together, I think that's a way to reduce that kind of competitive pressure of you're sacrificing this for that. When students start seeing it as I'm spending time with my friends, these are the people I would hang out with anyway, they don't start to see it as a sacrifice as much.
Right.
And I think coaches need to think about different students. Some students, you may need to tell them, hey, there are some students that I'm you are taking a break.
Oh, really?
Meetings with me are canceled. You are not cutting cards. You are going to stop thinking about debate for a week.
Okay.
And there are students that this year, I have told Ray, put down your computer, go watch a movie, right? There are other students that love breaks and can kind of especially without a lot of structure, can get into some bad habits. And so, there are some students that I'm hey, let's check in once a week and be are you on a normal sleeping schedule?
Yeah.
Are you have you thought about that app that you wanted to write? Maybe you might want to check in a little bit more and apply maybe pressure is the wrong word, but like a little sense of normalcy to their like winter break experience. I think it really depends on that student and like how they are. And in particular for our team, we're in terms of like our student population, they're from all over. So like no one's going to be here, right? Like in Kentucky, they're going back to Kansas, they're going back to Texas, and Minnesota, and California, and everywhere else. So having some way just to check in, I think, could also be really helpful.
Yeah. And I think the students you can recognize as having motivational issues over the break, those are the ones I tend to like have like maybe a weekly check-in with. Like let's keep our coaching schedule over the break every week. I know it's going to be unfortunate because you're going to be at home, but I won't take up more than 20 or 30 minutes of your time. Just want to know what you're working on. That kind of stuff, I think, can be really helpful in letting them know that you're still invested in debate, and they should at least be putting a part of their effort into it, even if they're not like dedicating a day or, don't give up playing video games over the break to do debate work, but definitely don't not do debate work.
Yeah. Have you utilized more online coaching and practicing methods? Does that come up more over winter break than normal?
Yes.
Oh yeah, and for exactly what you're talking about is like just the checking in makes it a lot easier, right? If people are home, then
Yeah, so we use Zoom a lot. We also use this site called Flipgrid. It's basically like it's mostly for high school students to like do speeches, but like it's just like an incredibly integrated, easy way to like do speeches. And so a lot of times if someone's like, I want to like improve on X, we have like a team Flipgrid, and it's like, okay, so just like put up like this speech once a week, and then like I'll just look at it whenever I can, and then like I'll offer like my commentary and feedback in video form. And it's a way for them to work on their own schedule and not have to like have a schedule that like aligns with like my schedule. Because also I'm taking a break. Coaches, if you're watching, you should be taking a break.
Yes.
Like
coaching, administrating, running a team is very stressful. You should take some time for yourself.
I think me and Justin are like in the same spot where we're like head argument coach and also organizer of the team. There's a lot of folks like that, especially like in NFA LD. You're tired. Like you have done so much work, so much extra work and like hours this semester. As the coach, I think you also need to come back with some fresh perspective and a little bit of a break as well.
So when I was talking to other debaters, there in the CETA community, there's probably a handful of teams that are just basically not taking a break. You know what I mean? Aside from the holidays, it's like they're just working through the break because they're going for those really elite level things. How prevalent is that sort of mentality in NFA-LD? Do you think that is a really distinguishing characteristic between these two?
I think it is. I think that like the fact that the top levels of NFA-LD are competitive, but not so at a detriment to students' well-being, is one of the reasons why I think that like A, my students stick with it for 4 years, right? But B, there's space in NFA-LD, I think, for a little bit of like reclaiming some of your time for yourself, and not letting debate swamp every moment of your day. Because I was on one of those squads. I worked at KU and we didn't get a winter break, right? And like you are working for 8 months a year, right? From the time that Georgia State starts to the end of the NDT, you don't stop cutting cards or showing up for coaching or any of those things. And it is exhausting, and it can be it can burn you out and make you really dislike the activity if you're like, I just need some time away.
Right.
Yeah, and that's like I think that's one of the things that I like about NFA-LD is that the Copeland race does not overtake everyone's mind because there is no Copeland. We've got some awards for season long, but like they're not. I don't know. There's not like a beautiful, huge pyramid that you get if you win it.
Right. And so and there's not like some sort of running tally of points or anything like that, right?
No, there've been discussions. We would like, I think, as a community to start doing that. Part of it has been in the post-COVID recovery, figuring out what the national circuit looks like and what those tournaments would be has been a little bit difficult. Just we're like trying to figure out how to settle the schedule a little bit. I think once that happens, that's kind of been the intent, is to establish something similar to the Copeland race for NFA-LD. Not necessarily as an intent to like drive competition to the level that NDT is at, but to give students something to like work towards in the regular season. Because a lot of students get their bid to NFA and they're like, I'll see you in April. Have a great year. I'll see you at NFA for my free trip to wherever.
Oh, really? Okay.
I mean, they don't completely check out, but they definitely have mentally checked out from they're not aiming towards something until NFA. And so I think a point system maybe provides a little bit of an incentive externally.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to do with the Grand Prix and the All-American Award is to encourage and reward the students that worked all season and had that competitive success and did sustain those efforts throughout the whole year. I kind of think that the person that was the top All-American last year was a pretty fantastic debater and would have won the Copeland in the NFA LD circuit. But so we have some things like that, but no, I don't think that there's such prestige attached to it that it drives people to work for 8 months straight. No.
Yeah.
Well, this is an interesting topic because that really helps to design what that award might look like, right? Because it does influence people's lives in terms of the discipline they need over winter break, right? One award can really affect how much investment people make over the winter break, and that's kind of fascinating, that little nuance between these two associations, especially when we have the same topic. Basically, you can compare apples to apples, and now you start seeing what makes them different, if the topic is the same. Fascinating. Thank you very much. Yeah, go for it.
I was going to say, I think it would be honestly kind of like a fascinating paper, or I don't know, panel if people do that, but just interrogating the differences and similarities that occurred in terms of the argument choices over the course of this season. I think would be really interesting to look at, and I know we've done a lot of our students went to basically 2 policy tournaments and 2 NFA LD tournaments. So we kind of have a little bit of a perspective. But I think it's kind of a weird comparison because obviously we can't change all of our arguments for policy and LD. They were just kind of the same. But I'd be interested to know what the policy only teams, in the ways in which they were really different from the LD teams.
Yeah. So I'm glad we talked about this. I think that a lot of this is helpful for people, entering the winter break, but it's also just interesting seeing the difference between associations sort of emerge at this time period. Mm-hmm. Thank you both again for it. We have only a couple episodes left in this season. And it's kind of weird because I have my hair now, but in the sequence of events, I will not have it last week. So afterwards. But anyways, we got a couple of episodes left, and I'm looking forward to them. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.